pushback that I got on this little tiny bill, that I was trying to hide the ball, that it was not transparent, and I got pushback from Government for California. Everyone thought I was upending the way that we communicate to our voters. And I saw it for what it was, a transparent measure to allow people, to direct people to a guide so they knew what they were voting for. I got it through the Senate, I got it through the Assembly, I got it to the governor's desk. People were still freaking out, and it was my only veto. So it was vetoed by the governor. So it was the biggest challenge, and I literally came to love that bill, right? I have two of my incredible staffers here, Sabrina and Ava, and it started out as just, it seemed like 7 words, and why are you even carrying this? And I fought hard for it. I mean, there were Republicans in some of the Senate committees, and I fought so hard. I had to fight harder for that bill than any other bill.
It's
and
remarkable.
I was proud of it, and I was proud that I got it as far as I did, but it was vetoed.
Yes, well, maybe next time, yes.
Yes, yeah.
So, as you mentioned, and we've kind of talked about this, you are known as a strong advocate on women's issues. What can you tell us about the current political landscape for issues affecting women and your own experience running as a woman for elected office?
Yeah, we're really lucky right now in the California State Legislature, where we've achieved parity in the Senate and we're one away in the Assembly, and so that is amazing. When I was sworn in, I learned that out of our 175-year history as the state of California, where over 4,000 men have served in the California State Legislature, that I was number 206 for women representing this great state. And at the time, it was only 206 women. Now we have 207 because a Republican came in after Bill Essayli. So we have 207 women that have been in the California State Legislature since our inception, which is great. We work on a lot of good issues. The California Legislative Women's Caucus works. We just had our retreat. We were talking about childcare, all sorts of issues, reproductive freedom. We just passed $90 million for Planned Parenthood so they could stay open through the end of July because of the effects of the federal government, this administration. And I think although we're lucky in California to live in a state that values reproductive health care for women, and we're up against challenges, of course, with the federal government. And those are challenges that are really hard. And I think, I have a 16-year-old daughter. And I think as much progress as we've made here in the state of California, you look at what's happening at our nation, and it's depressing. It's frightening, the fact that my daughter has less rights than I did at her age. And generally, I feel supported by so many of my male colleagues. There's a lot of allies. And, and I'm just going to bring this up because it's been, we were talking about it in the office earlier, about this undercurrent of misogyny that sometimes still exists, and you barely see it. And I sent a message to my son. He's at Cal. He's studying in Bologna right now. He's doing a semester abroad. And I sent him a message. And I said, I just want you to know, you're going to find yourself, you're 21 years old, you're in a fraternity, you're going to find yourself in rooms where men will put down women, or men will not value women. And it might be a place where you find yourself, you might want to uncomfortably laugh, or you might want to, you might just want to stay silent. In those moments, I want you to think about your mom, and I want you to think about your sister. And I want you to think about the type of man you want to be and the society you want to live in. Because when the person in that room, when the man in that room uncomfortably laughs or doesn't say anything or chooses not to challenge what's being said about women, and I'm specifically talking about what happened with the women's hockey team, you continue to uplift a society that is filled with misogyny. And my son said to me, Mom, thank you so much for pointing this out. I have been in those moments, and I love you, and I'm sorry that this continues to happen. And so I just, even though we've come so far, and I'm the generation before me, my mom, she was a nurse. My mother-in-law was a teacher. They were told they could be three things: secretaries, teachers, and nurses. And I'm lucky that I'm a lawyer. I have 3 degrees. I'm a California State Assembly member. And I'm, as a mom, and this is no offense to my husband, we still carry a load that is so great. I was on the floor of the assembly the other day trying desperately to figure out how to get money into my daughter's lunch account, and the task that I am still performing as the mother and the keeper of the home in terms of keeping everyone going with doctor's appointments, with all the school, it's enormous. And I think it's really important for men to understand that. And for men in the generation below me, for them to understand why some women are upset that the women's hockey team wasn't as valued as much as the men's. And I don't want to take anything away from the wins, from both those wins. But it hit me hard because I see how hard how hard we work, and sometimes how easily it is to dismiss us. And I'm lucky that I'm with a group of powerful women that refuse to be dismissed.
Thank you for that. I have sons too, and we've had a lot of those conversations over the years. I think this moment particularly illustrates that, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you about it this evening. You are going to be teaching a course at McGeorge coming up in the fall. You and I met and had coffee last year, and you told me about this idea, so tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. And after I talked to you, I emailed my former professor, Professor Kelso. I don't know if anyone's had Professor Kelso. I have to tell you a funny story about him. So when I was here, it was during the OJ trial. I'm sure some of you weren't born.
That's when I went to law school too,
yeah. And so Professor Kelso used to go to KCRA, and he would grade the prosecutors and the defense. And I went with him on a few occasions because I thought someday I'd be a legal correspondent or something. That's in everyone was doing court TV. But anyway, that was fun for me to do when I was here at McGeorge. But so I emailed Professor Kelso and I asked him, and I said, "This is what I really want to do. I've studied gun laws. I have never had a case other than when I was a prosecutor, but that's different. But I've been studying gun laws since 1999, since Columbine, since I was involved with the Brady campaign, and then I got involved with Moms Demand Action. I did pro bono legal work for what is now the Giffords Law Center. And I'm like, I want to put that into practice. I want to teach, the inception of the Second Amendment and the laws that came after, and then the Heller opinion, and how we now have an individual right to carry, and what that means, and when you live in a society that is so obsessed with guns and people are shot and killed every day, and like I said, gun violence is a leading cause of death for children and teens, what's the liability look like? And there was a course here that someone that had already been developed, and I looked at that and I said, I could teach that. I've lived that through my volunteer experience. I've lived that by developing different policy around ghost guns and different things. So it will be about the intersection of gun law and tort liability, and where we can hold gun manufacturers liable and where we can't. So I'm very excited about it, and I'm excited for all points of view on it as well, too. I'll never forget, it was almost like a Legally Blonde moment in my property class with Professor Curtis way back when he talked about law is free of passion. And really, that never seemed true for me, but really talking about the case law and the laws that have been passed on the books, whether it's federal or state laws, and how we can get at this problem that is, I think, it's a stain on this country that we have so many gun deaths. And what do we do as students of the law, as people who practice law, to try to solve this issue to save lives? And I think that's a course worth teaching, and I'm really grateful that that you're allowing me to teach here in the fall. I'm very excited.
We're very excited, yes. So I teach a number of courses on this campus, and I also direct our Capital Center for Law and Policy, and one of the things that I talk with students about is, when are you going to run for office? Are you thinking about running for office? And there are students who either want to run for office someday or want to work in the government kind of legislative space. What advice do you have for someone who is thinking, someday I might like to do that? How do you get there? What should you do?
Definitely, I found working on people's campaigns. I was just talking to Ken, a former assembly member, about when I was at St. Mary's College, I worked on Dianne Feinstein's campaign for governor in 1990. So getting on people's campaigns or an issue, a campaign issue that you care deeply about, is a good way to see how it works. I think interning in or being, there's executive fellow programs, there's different ways you could work for an assembly member or a senator. I was lucky that I was able to get my LLM here on the Graduate Legal Scholarship Program, and I was able to intern for Attorney General Bill Lockyer at the time. So I just think putting yourself out there, and I'm available for questions anytime you're thinking about it. And finding why you know your why. I think it's really important to know your why. Why do you want to be in politics? And the most effective politicians know their why, and they're in it for the work. They're not in it for the title. They're not in it for the perks. Those people, I think, do not have longevity like people who are authentic and in it to do good work. So know your why. Why are you willing to do that to yourself? Why are you willing to run for? Why are you willing? Definitely focus on issues that you care deeply about, and find those people that care about the same issues. Volunteer with, like I did with the Gun Violence Prevention Organization, or whatever it is, housing rights. There's so many issues to get involved with, but my best advice is to know your why.
So, final thoughts. Obviously, we are in a moment where the legal profession is facing challenges all over the place in terms of the rule of law, in terms of the role of AI going forward, in terms of complex policy issues. So for students who are in law school, I talk to my students all the time about the fact that this is a fascinating and also very complex time to be about to launch and become attorneys. Final words, thoughts, advice, insight, before we open the floor to questions.
Yeah, this is a complex time, and I think it's a hard time. I feel anxious a lot. And I just brought into the office a poster that says, "Work hard and be nice to people." And I think that the best thing you can do is, first of all, be true to yourself. Don't doubt yourself. I did that a lot. Early on in my legal career, I did want to say this one thing, because what I found after, I've been in my career now 35 years, and there was this one incident at the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office when I was 26 years old, where I was called into my supervisor's office, and he said to me, "So I was talking to some of the public defenders the other day, and they really like you." I thought that was a compliment, I thought, oh, that's great. And he said, they said that, you're very reasonable when it comes to plea and dispo, which is when you have someone in front of you and you're deciding whether you're going to trial or whether or not you're going to offer something. And many times I would work with the public defenders on, 6 months jail, or do we do 6 months rehab, like a hospital with, and I would try to get a sentence or some type of outcome that would be good for all involved. And so I thought being reasonable was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, according to the supervisor that I worked for, and that was his truth. He did not think a prosecutor being reasonable with a public defender in that instance, or being well liked by public defenders, was a good thing. And at 26, I believed him. I didn't know, I thought, oh gosh, I got to be tougher. I got to be like this person. I got to be like that person. But that's not who I was. I've always been a reasonable person. I've always been a kind person. I'm feisty. I will fight like hell for what I believe in, but I'm going to be reasonable. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to do the right thing according to my values. And that's okay. And I wish I knew that more at 26 than, now I know that. Now I am rooted in who I am, and I'm okay with who I am. And I just want you to know, because when you're going out into the workforce, there are going to be people who might question how you show up in the world. And I think it's really important for you to have faith in your values, in your lived experience, and how you treat others. And if someone's asking you to treat someone differently and it doesn't sit right with you, trust yourself.
Very, very good advice. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. Let's take advantage of this opportunity. Yes, in the back.
I was thinking about the intersection of media and politicians and how to get a message out, specifically with regards to urgency issues like domestic violence or gun violence, how to not get, I don't know, the message lost. It feels like it should be such urgent, everyday issues, just children dying. And it seems hard to get that. And how can legislators, up-and-coming students interested in policy, work in that?
Yeah, I think, we question that a lot. I actually just did some videos today with our Democratic caucus in terms of getting the message out about bills I've passed. It does seem like we're so overly saturated with, social media, and it's sometimes really hard to get that message out. We're working on that, but I think being consistent and being on all platforms. I don't think I'm on X anymore. We took ourselves off that. I just couldn't stomach it anymore. But I think it's really important to use all forms of media that you can. And we have newsletters. We write for different columns in San Francisco and San Mateo, and we just do everything we can to use the platforms that people are on. And I have to tell you too, I'm Gen X, and so this whole idea of like dancing on TikTok and things like that, I see some of my colleagues, I'm very uncomfortable with, and I think that some people are saying, well, this is how people are relating to people, and I don't know if you'll ever see me dancing on TikTok to get my point across, but I think it is important to try to meet people where they're at and be in those spaces that even if I'm uncomfortable being in, I have to figure out how to talk to every generation.
Fair. Questions? Oh, come on now. We got a lot of people. There's got to be questions. Teddy.
Okay, so it seems like there's a number of up-and-coming politicians. Like I saw one in Texas and Maine, and they're standing on a platform of like the 1%, that minority that's actually causing all the problems are the billionaires. And so that kind of makes you think about, I don't know, typical billionaires, but then I think about corporations and I think about lobbying. So I don't know, it seems, I don't know, is there any way to address that where it seems like people want to represent their constituents, but then all of a sudden once they get elected, like I heard like RFK Jr. is endorsing pesticides now, and I guess he was always against pesticides, but he's probably getting lobbying from a pesticide company. So is there any way to address this where people get elected and then all of a sudden they start representing like PG&E instead of the people in it?
Yeah, I think, money in politics is a serious thing. And of course, with Citizens United, it makes it even more difficult. Money is in politics. And I think that you have to, nobody could pay me enough to override my values or do what's right for my constituents. There may be people that are different, but obviously when you look at our federal government and the billionaire class and what they're getting away with, and how, the limited number of taxes that they pay, if any at all, is a real problem. And especially when you have those people getting behind a message that it's the welfare class, the people that are taking from the system who need the most help, or who have 2 or 3 jobs. And it's like, no, the people that are taking from the system are the ones that are making all the money and refusing to pay their share. But I think money in politics is definitely a serious issue. And there's people, I don't take money from oil and gas. I don't take money from tobacco companies. I don't take money from gun violence, gun manufacturers. I mean, there's just some organizations that I don't take money from. And a lot of politicians are like that too. So it's a problem. The thing is, for me, I raise money off a lot of just individuals and people that support my work, and it's different in the assembly than it was at the local level because limits are different. But at the same time, I think the politicians that are only doing things because certain companies want them to, and I think those people eventually don't do well. I do think that people that are connected to their constituents, I do find the most successful politicians are the ones that really know their constituents and are connected to those that they're representing.
So that should hopefully win out in the long run.
Yeah, and it's the voters, right? The voters have the power to elect people who represent them and who show up for them. And I know that's sometimes very hard when it comes up against that billionaire force. But Alice Walker said the most common way people lose their power is by thinking they don't have any. You all have power. Every single voter has power. And you have the ability to look where people are taking money from and how they're voting. And if they're voting in a way that's inconsistent with what their constituents want, if they're doing only what PG&E wants when PG&E is having a negative effect in their district, they have power at the voting booth. So it's a hard dilemma, but for now, we still have our democracy, and I'm praying to God, that our midterms go off. I mean, obviously, we see the fight that some people in the federal administration are putting, what President Trump is saying about what he's going to do, nationalize elections, all the threats that we hear. But at the same time, we have power at the voting booth.
Justin, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that knowing your why is really important to taking the time to run for office. But I'm curious about the when. When did you know that it was right to run for office the first time? When did you know that it was right to make the switch from local in San Francisco to statewide? What was the pivotal point that made you say this is the time to do it?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I went through something called Emerge California. It's a program that trains Democratic women to run for office. I went through that in 2009 when I was pregnant with my daughter. And I was a staffer to Supervisor Michaela Alioto-Pierre at the time. And then I was a staffer to Supervisor Mark Farrell. So I was like chief of staff to 2 supervisors in San Francisco for 9 years. And, it's just I wanted to be supervisor. I remember walking the halls of City Hall saying, my name's going to be on the door one of these days. And so then while I was an aide to Mark Farrell, I got a call from Mayor Lee, and he said he needed a county clerk. There was something going on at the county clerk's office, and they wanted me to be the county clerk. And I thought to myself, county clerk? I never went to law school. I never thought I'm going to be the county clerk, And I talked to my mentors, and they said this would be a great experience for you. And so I became the county clerk in San Francisco. It was an appointed position, and I did that for 2 years, which was incredible. And then sometimes in politics, things happen, and it was, Mayor Lee died, and then the person that I had been working for, Mark Farrell, and I was the county clerk at the time, became mayor of San Francisco. In a again, Google it for some high drama. It was crazy how he was a moderate, and then he teamed up with the progressives to then become mayor for a short time. And when he did that, his position, the District 2 supervisor position, came open. And he ended up appointing me. And he appointed me, and we talked about this later, because everyone wanted this job. Everyone wants to be District 2 supervisor in San Francisco. And he appointed me because I dedicated 5 years of my life to him, and 4 years before that. And he knew that I cared about the district. He knew I was going to, that I was in it for the right reasons. And so although I was appointed at first, I became supervisor by being appointed. I then ran, that was January of 2018, and then I ran November of 2018 and won. 4 years later, I ran again, no one ran against me. And then when Phil Ting turned out, the assembly position came open, and people started talking to me about that. And I thought, I'm not gonna go to the assembly. I have a daughter that's still in high school. That doesn't sound right. I don't think I can be the mom I wanna be. And they're like, why don't you talk to some moms in the assembly, and talk to Buffy Wicks and talk to Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. And so I did. And I thought, gosh, this sounds like something I could do. I talked to Jackie Spear, who's been one of my idols forever. Mm-hmm. And they got me very excited about it. And then I talked to my daughter. And I said, what do you think about Mom doing this? And she said, Mom, I would be mad at you if you didn't. And so I ran for assembly. And I'm so glad I did. My daughter was just up here 3 weeks ago lobbying on Dawn Addis's bill, fast fashion bill. She's my little environmentalist. She wants to go to law school, and she wants to basically work on behalf of the environment. Maybe not as a politician, but she was up here, and I saw her in her element. I saw her talking to Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal and some of my colleagues. And even though I miss her when I'm up here 4 days a week, I don't think she misses me as much as I miss her, but she gets to see Mom in this environment, advocating for the people I love, advocating for issues I care so deeply about. And I've inspired her to do that. So my initial thought, the assembly wouldn't be right for me. I'm glad I investigated it more. I'm glad I asked more questions and knew that it would be right for me. So, and you get 12 years, if that's your term limit here. Everyone's like, what are you doing next? I'm like, I just got here. I'm actually love being an assembly member. I am not looking for another job to do. And I also, one last thing I want to say about that, because for me it's really important. I've never been the type of politician that says I need to be governor, or I need to be this, or I need to be that. I'm truly led by the work of public service, and I ask all the time, based on my faith, where can I be of service? Because I really am guided by this, by St. Francis in terms of make me a channel of your peace. Where do I show up in the world? Where does that avenue open up for me to be of service? That's my purpose. Where am I going to be of service? And I kind of let the universe guide me as to where that's going to be. That might sound a little hokey, but that's truly how I see things. And I've been lucky so far that I've been able to be supervisor for 7.5 years, and now I get to work in the California State Assembly, which is truly an honor.
Yes, Eliana.
I guess we know that it's obviously not required to have a legal education or to be a lawyer, to be a policymaker. But for you personally, how would you say that your legal education or just your legal and critical thinking has shaped the way that you do policy, or has been of value to your policy?
That's such a good question. I'm so happy I have my law degree. And my advanced law degree in government and public policy, honing in on policy issues. It really is a disciplined way of thinking. I mean, will you ever forget about Iraq? I mean, you know, it's just really, you think in terms that are differently than others. And I think too, you understand the law better than those that don't have a legal education. And when you're a legislator and you're passing laws, it's really good to have an understanding of how they might function in the case or how they might function in the real world. And I think that has, it has really helped me. And I think, you know, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, which I love. I love all the issues that come through the Judiciary Committee. I think it just gives you a deeper understanding of policy and how laws might look and what the unintended consequences of them might be too. We talk a lot about that in law school too. Like, so I think it's been very beneficial to me.
Vicky.
Just a follow-up on that, because I'm one of Professor O'Neill's statutes and regulations students, that in terms of developing the legislation, are the legislators taking things like statutory canons into account?
I wouldn't say all are. You know, I think that there are people who that definitely try. We have, you know, legislative council. Like all our ideas go through legislative council, so we don't have to write the laws ourselves. We have help, thank goodness. You know, and they're vetted through so many. Through different committees. So whether they are in the beginning or not, there's a process in place to make sure that all eyes on the bills that make their way through the California State Legislature have to take that into consideration at some point, whether or not they do at the outset or not.
Yes.
How would you define power and authority?
How would I define power and authority?
Or the boundary between those two?
Well, I think many people can have power. It's how they use it. You know, I have more power in the assembly than I did probably on the Board of Supervisors to pass laws that affect more people. And I use that in a way that I think is good. You see other people that are elected to office that have power and they use it to enrich themselves. And so I think different people can have power and use it either in a good or a bad way. And again, getting back to how we live amongst each other, who do we want to lift up? Do we want to lift up those who use power for the general good? Or do we want to continue to give passes to those who use power to hurt people? And I know where I fall on that, and I probably know where all of you fall on that, but that's why I think it's so important for us to make sure we have limits on people's power, and that we do everything we can. You know, you hear the term people power, you know, that the more of us unite together around a common cause, the more powerful we are. And I think that it's really important that we continue to not take things for granted. You know, I think for so long in this country, you know, you think about the First Amendment, you think about the, you know, freedom of speech, you think about the freedom to protest, you think about all of these things that I think for so long we might have taken for granted. And to see that the threat they've come under, for me, people might think differently about this, but to see that people are protesting in ways that are getting them killed in our country. I mean, I remember learning about Kent State, you know, during the Vietnam War and thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And now we're watching something like that happen. And so I think that we have to never take for granted the incredible rights we have in this country, and we have to check people who would use power, again, for their own gain and to the detriment of the rest of us.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
You mentioned the affordability of childcare, and I'm a mother of 2 young boys, and you also mentioned feeling hesitant about running for the assembly with your daughter at home. I still believe that we have a problem with not providing enough paid leave for when we have our kids, because like I remember when I had my children that I think it was limited to 12 weeks of like 60% of what I was making, and so the affordability of childcare is an issue, but like if my the ex-husband and I had not been dealing with that stress of having this huge financial setback when we had our kids, we probably would have been in a better position to pay for childcare. So I'm just curious, like, is paid leave considered a done deal, or are you still like fighting for it?
I'm so glad you asked that question. No, you are absolutely right. It is ridiculous, the fact that we do not have paid leave, longer paid leave for mothers and fathers. You know, it's something that I care deeply about and something that is definitely worth fighting for. I think we need to make certain that this is something we don't put on the back burner. Like I talked about childcare being on the back burner. You know, it's so hard to accomplish some of the things that we need immediately that we forget about important issues like paid family leave. And we have to do better. We absolutely have to. So it's definitely not forgotten. The Women Caucus, we do talk about it a lot. So it's definitely a priority of ours. It's just trying to figure out how we fund it. And it goes to how are we taking care of what seems like a woman's issue, but is really an economical issue. It's a family issue. It's a societal issue. And we need to do better like some of our European allies. So.
All right. Thank you so much for the great questions. Thank you so much for being here. We so appreciate it. And we have a little reception. I'm sure students will want to say hello. And we have a reception, you all. We have the till 7, so please come ask questions if you have them, and don't leave